All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we are tracking a massive, literally world-changing paradigm shift. We're moving away from rigid geographic borders and heading straight toward the bare metal computation of sovereign, decentralized digital states. We're going to look at the very real breakdown of traditional territorial lines and the rise of what are called network states. It's a wild transition, so let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're covering the end of cartographic stasis, fracturing the geopolitical map, the rise of network states, building the semiotic bridge, digital roots, physical leaves, and finally, the post-Westphalian future. A lot of fascinating ground to cover, so let's keep moving.
Section 1. The end of cartographic stasis. We really have to start by examining the traditional geographic world order. To understand where we're going, look at the timeline of how we got here. Way back in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia basically invented the concept of modern territorial sovereignty. Fast forward to 1945, and the post-World War II era essentially locked in what our sources call cartographic stasis, an agreement to just freeze the borders on the map. But then, look at 2022. With massive global conflicts like the Russo-Ukrainian War, we are seeing this rigid, paper-based agreement violently fracture under the pressure of modern geopolitical realities. The old rules just aren't holding up anymore.
Think about the traditional globe sitting in a classroom. That perfectly illustrates the old world, a geopolitical map completely constrained by physical terrain and a deterministic division of land. For centuries, you literally couldn't have nationalism without a physical map to point at, right? Borders were highly visible, and if a nation wanted more territory, well, they generally had to take it by force.
Section 2. Fracturing the geopolitical map. The world order is quite literally shifting beneath our feet.
The sources impartially map out this geopolitical transition, and it's fascinating. They note how ideological and cultural alignment is increasingly superseding traditional nation-state boundaries. The 20th century was defined by a very official economic divide, capitalism versus communism. But today, that primary global axis is shifting toward unofficial, cultural, and ideological divides. Physical proximity just matters less now than digital and ideological proximity.
And that leads to this absolutely crucial point. Because there is an intrinsic lack of scarcity in digital territory, it totally reopens the frontier for human coordination. Instead of a zero-sum game where nations fight over finite patches of physical dirt, the digital realm offers infinite space. As the sources beautifully put it, the new system isn't fighting for borders, it's fighting for backlinks and voluntary alignment.
Section 3. Rise of network states. So physical borders are fracturing. What exactly takes their place? Enter the network state. Balaji Srinivasan defines this as a cloud-first, land-last approach. Imagine a highly aligned digital community that creates a virtual capital long before they ever acquire physical territory. You don't start with the land, you start with the minds. A community builds its economy, culture, and governance completely online first. Then, only later, do they crowdfund physical patches of Earth around the globe. It's a total inversion of the old model.
The contrast here is just stark. Our traditional nation-state is bound by geography. It takes a chunk of land and traps millions of disputing people inside contiguous borders. A network state does the exact opposite. It connects probabilistically through digital networks. It takes millions of highly aligned people scattered across the globe and unites them digitally, eventually creating a physical archipelago of small, interconnected enclaves. And these aren't just thought experiments. We're talking about quantifiable entities with growing populations in real economies scattered across the globe. You've got network states with over 1 million citizens, massive annual incomes, and physical square footage spanning continents. It functions just like a traditional country, but the whole shebang is organized by a digital network rather than an arbitrary line on a physical map.
Section 4. Building the semiotic bridge. Now, as we zoom in from macro geopolitics, we inevitably run into a critical mechanical question.
Seriously, how do we actually build this? How does a law passed in the cloud trigger a physical reality? The sources point out that right now, we mostly interact with computers like chimpanzees pushing pretty colorful buttons for a dopamine reward. This graphical user interface, the GUI, is a fragile illusion. It breaks easily and severely limits our expressive power. To get real control, we have to bypass this GUI dead end.
We cross this gap using what the sources call a semiotic bridge. This is an exact lossless text pipeline. On one side, you have your brain, warm, messy, and associative. On the other side, you have machine hardware, cold,
rigid, and demanding absolute determinism. The only way to securely bridge these two wildly different worlds without a catastrophic mistranslation is through pure, structured text, like a JSON contract. It's a simple, standardized text format that machines can easily read and execute without any pixelated guesswork.
I absolutely love this visceral metaphor from the sources. It perfectly grounds the reality of what we're doing. Tricking rocks into thinking, using lightning and text. There is no magic ghost in the machine. It is literally just silicon, rocks, infused with electrical currents, bending to the exact deterministic script of our explicit text. This is exactly how a digital network state begins to orchestrate physical reality.
Section 5. Digital roots, physical leaves. Let's look at how this builds into actual on-chain architecture. This flow is honestly brilliant. It securely anchors data on a blockchain root, legally wraps the entity, mathematically proves human work, and finally triggers real-world action out at the edge. We start with a LIFO, or last-in, first-out structure, creating a tamper-proof digital seal via an ERC7827 JSON smart contract. Then, a Kali wrapper steps in to act as a recognized digital legal entity. After that, a kernel sign mathematically proves a human actually put in the work, what the sources brilliantly call a record of sweat. And finally, all of this travels down to the physical edge. And that physical edge is the cheerbot. It's an unassuming little desk device, but the moment a verified change occurs in your network state, the cheerbot reads that smart contract data and physically reacts. It translates those on-chain updates into physical electrical signals through its GPIO pins. So, a digital law gets passed and a real physical motor moves or a light turns on. It perfectly bridges the digital and physical worlds. Section 6. The Post-Westphalian Future. The infrastructure is completely built, and we are looking at a monumental shift in how we architect meaning. As these network states grow, you can't just rely on AI guesswork or fragile visual interfaces. You have to move away from being a passive, GUI tenant who just pushes buttons and become an active sovereign pilot. That means grasping the unmediated text of a command line interface, a CLI. You have to physically step in, write the explicit text, and bend the machine to your strict deterministic intent. You dictate the exact terms of your reality.
So the semiotic bridge is fully built. The only question left for this explainer is what will you program your sovereign reality to do? Because as the traditional borders of the post-WW2 map continue to fracture, the opportunity to opt into a decentralized, highly aligned network state is no longer science fiction. It's happening. Will you remain a passive tenant of the old map or become the sovereign pilot of your digital future? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the architecture around you.